This week's Yoga Talk Show is brought to you by Four Sigmatic. Four Sigmatic is a nutritional supplement company that specializes in medicinal mushrooms, and they make these really cool packets that you can make into basically mushroom coffee or mushroom tea. It's meant to replace your morning coffee or your morning tea, and the ones I particularly like are cordyceps and lion's mane. We had the founder of Four Sigmatic on the show a couple of years ago, you might remember. Really great company. They use fruiting bodies, not just mycelium. They use non-chemical extractions, so you get lots of beta-glucans, lots of terpenoids, and you get all the healing properties of mushrooms without all the gas and bloating that you often get with mushroom products that you'll find in the pharmacy or in your nutritional store locally. As a sponsor of the show, they've offered listeners a 15% discount. Go to foursigmatic.com/yogabody. That's foursigmatic, all spelled out, foursigmatic.com/yogabody. And use coupon code YOGABODY when you check out, and you'll save 15%. Again, the ones I like are cordyceps and lion's mane, but you'll find a whole bunch of other cool products you might want to check out as well. Thanks to Four Sigmatic for supporting the show. When you go to the gym or you go to a yoga class or any kind of fitness class in general, the instructors tend to talk about body parts that we're very familiar with, like our biceps or our triceps or our transverse abdominis or our glutes or our quads. But there are an important group of muscles called your pelvic floor collectively. And if you think of it like the diaphragm of your lungs as sort of this balloon at the bottom of your lungs, you also have this pelvic diaphragm, which is this muscle and connective tissue structure that's vitally important. One way to think about it is if you imagine a Christmas tree in the corner of your house, the Christmas tree base is very much like the pelvic floor, meaning the strength and stability of that base will determine the strength and stability of the tree being analogous for your spine. And so a strong base, a strong pelvic floor, a strong and stable spine. Now, that's just one of the many benefits. One of the challenges with a weak and a tight pelvic floor, which is what many of us have, is people will have sexual dysfunction, they will have incontinence, they will have prolapse in some cases, they will have poor posture, you can have bowel problems, all sorts of things come from a weak pelvic floor. When it's taught, it's usually only taught in the context of pre- and postnatal care, and even then it's taught rarely from my anecdotal experience in my social group. And it's a really important thing to focus on. In yoga, it's often referred to as Mula Bandha. In birthing practices, it might be referred to as Kegels or Kegels. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. In other circles, they might just simply refer to it as the pelvic floor. For you and your movement practice, your yoga practice, your exercise, your health, the way I would encourage you to think about this is just like that base on the Christmas tree, strengthening that base and thinking about ways you can incorporate pelvic floor engagement, particularly at the bottom of your exhale. That's when you'll be able to really lift and engage the most, into all kinds of movement modalities. It'll stabilize you, and it'll stabilize your entire torso. It'll stabilize your entire body, whether you're doing a chaturanga or a plank, or whether you're simply running or walking or carrying some type of box around your home. It's really, really important for your reproductive health, your sexual health, your bladder control, and all kinds of other things. And because we don't squat, we don't lift, we don't do this natural range of motions, unfortunately, we need to do a lot of training in this area. On this week's show, we'll talk about the pelvic floor specifically, hopefully demystify what's going on down there, and hopefully give you some tips that you can use in your practice and in your life. Enjoy the show. So hello and welcome everyone. This is Lucas Rockwood with the Yoga Talk Show. Thanks for tuning in. Today's show is called Demystifying the Pelvic Floor, and I'm here with Adrianne Flinn. Adrianne has a degree in kinesiology with an emphasis on exercise science. She has certificates in Pilates, yoga trapeze, Zenga, bar, and a whole bunch of other movement modalities. Of all her work, she specializes in the pelvic floor, which we'll be chatting about today, but also spinal conditions and fascia. She served as a fitness specialist for NASA's Langley Research Center and currently runs an eating disorder center in Southern California. You can learn more about her work at thousandfoldlotus.com, all spelled out, thousandfoldlotus.com. Adrianne, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me, Lucas.
You know, in yoga classes, teachers often use things like Mula Bandha, engage your core, suck your navel into your spine, you know, all this vernacular and technical language that gets tossed around. I wonder if we could start with just some basic definitions for people listening without all the jargon or anything like that? Just how to think about and understand the pelvic floor.
Right. So that's kind of why I've started teaching about the pelvic floor, is when we often cue it, our clients and students have no clue what we're actually talking about most of the time. So when we talk about the pelvic floor, we're talking about the musculature at the base of the pelvis, from pubic bone to tailbone and sit bone to sit bone. And this musculature can look kind of like as if you're cupping your hands and drinking out of water out of the cup of your hands in the bottom of the pelvis. So when an instructor says to engage your pelvic floor or to do a Kegel, they want you to actually activate that musculature. And in doing so, it also helps connect with our transverse abdominis, which is the deepest layer of abdominals, which is kind of that belly button drawing to spine cue that you often hear in class.
Pubic bone to tailbone, sit bone to sit bone. Another way that I've heard of it is, if you think of the bottom of your lungs having your diaphragm, it's kind of like another diaphragm, right? Right at the base of your spine.
Exactly, yes. The pelvic floor is often called a second diaphragm, basically, and it kind of moves up and down.
And I guess what happens is, some people heard you mention Kegels, I don't know how to pronounce it. People definitely have heard mula bandha before. They've heard all these terms, and people argue about whether they're the same, whether they're different. If we just look below the waist, there's quite a lot going on there in terms of tissues and organs and all kinds of things. Do you separate or differentiate between Kegels and mula bandha and pelvic floor and perineum and all these kinds of things? Or are these just different modalities using different language to talk about the same thing?
I consider them same language or different language for the same thing, rather. So yes, all the same thing instructors are using just to get the same message across. For
women who have been taught Kegel exercises, can you walk through the benefits of those and why those are not just for expecting or postpartum women?
Yes. So I'm really glad you asked that, because that's the biggest message I'm trying to get across to women, is that this area of the body tends to get weak over time, just like any muscle. So you don't necessarily have to have gone through childbirth. I've had clients in their 30s that have weak pelvic floors, so much so they're having stress incontinence. So the importance of engaging the pelvic floor is it is so important. It's basically the center of our base of support and helps fire up the core all the way. So it's, doing the Kegel and the pelvic floor can help women connect with that musculature, teach it to engage, and help strengthen it.
And I guess when people start practicing these things, whether it's in a yoga class or a pre or postpartum workshop or pelvic floor workshop or whatever it is, initially it feels really tedious and so nuanced that maybe it doesn't matter, like learning to wiggle your ears or something like that. But I think sometimes people don't really make the connection between these subtle energy centers and movement and stabilization. So why is this area so important for a multitude of movements and just our general health?
As you were talking about wiggling your ears, I thought that was kind of a funny analogy, because some people can't wiggle their ears. So they really haven't developed that coordination yet. I think everybody probably has the capability of wiggling their ears. They just haven't practiced it enough. And that's where I'm finding the big disconnect in the pelvic floor is when women are trying to engage their pelvic floor, nothing's happening, or they haven't practiced it enough to get that mind-body connection to actually activate. So I really like teaching biofeedback techniques that people can do at home to learn if it's actually engaging and how to kind of get that mind-body connection going. Now, once the pelvic floor is strong, it's going to help fire up our transversus and help stabilize the lumbar spine, prevent injuries there, and also for women, help prevent stress incontinence and pelvic organ prolapse, which is such a big issue in the female population.
So let's talk about those two things because these are private issues, people often don't talk about them, but it doesn't mean they're not happening. And there's a bunch of issues that are super, super common that people don't realize are common because it's not something that often comes up at the dinner table. But incontinence and prolapse, can you talk about those, and also this concept of stress incontinence, which maybe people haven't differentiated between the different types?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the biggest thing here is nobody's talking about it. So I began basically starting to ask every single client that walked in the door if they were basically peeing their pants when they sneeze for stress incontinence. And it kind of shocks them at first, but once you start digging deeper, you realize the number of women that are having this issue, and it's so many of them. It's just, they're not going to just give you that information when you first meet with them as their instructor. So basically, there's technically three types of incontinence. There's stress incontinence, which is leaking of urine with a stress, such as a sneeze, jumping, anything, skipping down the road, and you get a little urine release. And then you've got urge incontinence, which is kind of the feeling of having to urinate, but then you can't really fully empty the bladder all the way. And then there's mixed, which is typically stress and urge combined. And the strengthening of the pelvic floor really benefits the stress incontinence. When it comes to urge incontinence or mixed, you really want to train the mind to learn how to hold the bladder long enough and then teach it to release all the way. So you typically want to tackle that differently than engaging pelvic floor and doing the Kegels over and over, which is pretty much just for your stress incontinence. Now, pelvic organ prolapse will happen down the road with a weakened pelvic floor. So usually if you have stress incontinence, pelvic organ prolapse starts to precede it in the following years.
And I know some people listening, the incontinence, the peeing yourself thing, they understand that, and they maybe have some experience directly or indirectly with it. But prolapse, I think, is still a term that people are not familiar with. So can you talk us through what's actually happening there?
Sure, yeah. So basically, the pelvic floor is helping to support our organs, such as you've got the bladder towards the front of the body, for women, the vagina in the center of the body, and then the rectum in the back side of the body. So if you just kind of cut the body in half and look at it from a sideways view, what begins to happen when the pelvic floor is weak is the bladder can start to fall backwards towards the vaginal canal, and it can actually start to sink down into the vaginal canal. And in some cases, it'll actually start to come outside of the vaginal canal, where a client can actually see that tissue outside of the vagina. So the same thing can happen with the rectum. It can start to cave into the backside of the vaginal canal and start to sink down. So, keeping the pelvic floor strong is going to help support all of those organs. And I think a lot of people don't realize that until it's way too late, and then they're having to deal with surgery to kind of bring those organs back up into place.
And this goes for lots of different muscles in the body, but weak and tight is just kind of a recipe for disaster, and it's the default when things are atrophied, when things are not used. And so this is a big part of what's happening right in our pelvic floor. We're not squatting down, we're not getting up and down off the ground, and so from lack of use and lack of sort of positive stress and weight-bearing things, we're tight and weak. Is that fair, or is there more to it than that?
No, that's exactly right. I always tell people you really want a strong and supple pelvic floor. We want it to be flexible. We want it to be strong. And the weak and tightness thing, I mean, that happens all over the body with any of our muscles, and the pelvic floor is no exception.
So on the two extremes, there's people who have absolutely no idea what's going on down there. And then on the other extreme, if you go on Instagram and things, you'll see people doing what I've heard is called like vaginal kung fu. And they are, lifting weights with their vaginal muscles and things like this. And so I'm just curious, what are your thoughts in terms of using jade eggs, in terms of, assisted, I guess you could call it mechanically assisted pelvic floor strengthening stuff? Is any of that necessary? Is it too extreme?
I think if you just think about a classic way of getting your body in shape, you don't start with 50-pound weights to do bicep curls. I mean, I've never even been able to lift 50-pound weights, right? So with the pelvic floor, I really like to kind of take my clients through a process. And the first process is literally seeing if they can actually fire those muscles at all, get any kind of mind-body connection. Then I like to give them almost like a Kegel prescription. So doing some short twitch engagements, long twitch fiber engagements, seeing if they can kind of get a routine down where they're engaging without any resistance at all. I also really like it when they use biofeedback techniques to make sure things are actually working the right way when their brain tells that muscle to fire. And then once they can kind of do the full prescription of all the long twitch engagements and all the short twitch engagements and do that well, then I think moving into the jade eggs and things like that is okay. But I think you really need to take the steps, the proper steps, almost like you would in a normal conditioning situation of the body with any other muscle.
One issue that comes up for me is, there's this huge thing now, especially with postpartum women. People just have these anxieties about their body. And I guess I just want to make sure that we make a distinction between a problematically weak pelvic floor and just a naturally changing body postpartum. And what I mean by that is sort of cosmetic vaginal surgery is crazy on the rise. And I think a lot of this is just driven by this weird cultural obsession with youth. We have men scrape their faces to look like boys, and women want the vagina of a 15-year-old girl. And it's all very bizarre and creepy, and I think gives people sort of body dysmorphia and things like that. So how for people listening who are suddenly worried that they can't lift a 50-pound dumbbell with their vagina, I want to make sure that we're not creating complexes, And so how do we distinguish between a problematic pelvic floor and someone who's just had 3 children and has a different, totally healthy, wonderful body?
Well, I think your biggest indicator could be if you're leaking urine. So that's not normal. Most women have decided it's normal for some reason. Women didn't talk about this, but I mean, as far as appearances or the vagina changing as the body ages, that's all good and well. Our whole body changes as we age. We're going to get, our skin changes, we're going to get wrinkles, things like that. It's fine. The appearance really is not a big deal. But, if you are leaking urine when you're jumping up and down, you can't even play with your kids, that's a big red flag right there. That means the health of your pelvic floor is not good at the moment. Anything else, I mean, as long as you're, not leaking urine, don't have pelvic organ prolapse, then to me, you're golden. So, I mean, all appearances aside and feelings aside, that's kind of your 2 big indicators there.
And just the general proprioception for this area of the body is really, really low, meaning most people have never consciously engaged this part of the body. So I wonder if you can just talk us through a really simple practice, just so people listening can close their eyes and feel their pelvic floor for a moment.
I usually have clients just lay on the back pretty much and be what we call a neutral pelvis. So basically just laying the pelvis flat, hip bones and pubic bone kind of in the same plane. The biggest misconception I'll just point out while we're talking about that is that people do a posterior tilt. They send their tailbone up to the ceiling and their pubic bone towards them they think that that's a Kegel, and we can really engage pelvic floor and do the Kegel in the neutral pelvis, totally flat. So that's where we want to be. And I do encourage patients and clients just to start breathing first and just see if they can bring their energy towards the pelvis and the pelvic floor. In general, we've just brought so much attention away from that area. It's kind of a taboo subject, especially women after giving childbirth. They sometimes don't even want to look at the vagina or put any attention there. Or if they had a C-section, they don't want to look at the scar, touch the scar. They kind of just move their energy away from that area. So first, I like for women to just lay there and get comfortable with it. Then I encourage them to start to engage the pelvic floor, and I like to use imagery cues because I find that pretty helpful. So the most common one everyone hears is stopping the flow of urine, as if you were peeing and you stop the flow of urine. But I like to use ones such as imagining there's a marble going all the way up the vaginal canal and then going all the way back out again, because releasing the pelvic floor is just as important as the engagement. So that's really important. If they are engaging pelvic floor, they need to relax that musculature all the way to kind of do a true Kegel, the full engagement and relaxation.
Let's take a quick break from our show to thank this week's sponsor, Four Sigmatic. Four Sigmatic makes the highest quality medicinal mushroom beverages on the market. Instead of nutritional supplements like capsules or pills, they make these really cool sachets that you put into a glass of hot water. Yoga Body listeners get 15% off. Go to foursigmatic.com. That's all spelled out, foursigmatic.com/Yoga Body. And when you check out, use code YOGABODY as a coupon code, and you'll save 15% on your order.
Kind of do a true Kegel, the full engagement and relaxation. Other cues can be such as they're trying to kind of pick up a tissue off the floor with the vagina, kind of drawing upward and inward, or pubic bone and tailbone coming together and going upwards towards the belly button. So I use those imagery cues. And then a simple biofeedback technique can be just to take a clean finger and just insert it in the vagina and see if you can feel the musculature engage around your finger. So that would feel almost like the way a baby would suck on a finger. It'll feel kind of like that. And it's also important that the perineum, the muscular area between vagina and anus, goes inward towards the body and doesn't bulge outward. So you can also place the finger there and feel that the perineum's moving up into the body as opposed to bulging out the way it would with kind of a bowel movement.
When I first started training in yoga, one of my early teachers explained to me that everything in yoga is mula bandha and you should be squeezing your anus all throughout your practice. So I got really obsessed with this. And I was basically walking around, and every 10 seconds I was sort of doing Kegels or whatever you want to call it. I called it mula bandha, but same idea. And long story short, I got really anxious and really constipated for about 3 days. So I do want to put this in the context. I do know that when people start doing this, they often start to feel results just in terms of general awareness, but also strength pretty quickly. But what is like an appropriate practice length for people? Like, should people try to take a break from work and do some pelvic floor engagement throughout the day? Is this something that they should simply do in the bathroom or before bed? Or what are your thoughts in terms of, reasonable practices?
Well, when they're first starting out, I usually just recommend setting aside, I always say 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the evening. And in the beginning, I really like for women to have a private space in their home just to lay on the floor for a moment, which can be challenging when they have kids running around and a crazy life. But because the focus really needs to be there, especially because a lot of people don't have that mind-body connection yet. And this takes a little bit of focus. So you'll hear people say, do it while you're driving. And I think in the very beginning, there's a lot of focus that needs to happen, and that's not really the best time. So I really encourage women, at least for the first 4 weeks or so that they're doing these, that they cut out the 10 minutes in the morning, the 10 minutes in the evening. And if that 10 minutes leads to 20 minutes, which it often does because you get really into what you're focusing on and doing, then that's great. But I really like for people to start like that. And again, the relaxation is a big part to it. So focusing as much on the relaxing the pelvic floor as you do engaging the pelvic floor. So unlike what you mentioned, you don't want to be kind of engaging all day long and walking around with a tightened pelvic floor because that's not beneficial either for that musculature.
The default, when people think of pelvic floor, deep core, any of these things, people often default to crunches and various crunch things and ab burner sequences they'll find on YouTube and these kinds of things. Are these things helpful for pelvic floor? Does it just depend? How should people think about traditional core exercises in the context of pelvic floor training?
I kind of come back from a strong Pilates background, so I really like it when people first learn how to engage all the muscles, laying there in a neutral spine, not doing any crunches or sit-ups, the spinal flexion at all, and actually fire through the pelvic floor and transversus and kind of feel that engagement happening, even just a small oblique engagement, laying on the floor, just kind of sliding ribs towards the hips without smushing that low back down. And then kind of moving from there, adding on leg levers to it, which is pretty traditional of Pilates movement, and making sure that musculature stays engaged while we start moving, and then moving into your flexion type stuff down the road. But I feel like if you're just going into a gym and doing 100 sit-ups, you're really not benefiting the core at all. Most of the time, the deep core muscles aren't fired at all. They kind of turn off with high loads, and it's more of a disservice and just kind of a waste of time, really.
This basic exercise science concept of time under tension, I think, is really important as well. And you see this in a lot of traditional stuff, whether it's a push-up or a pull-up or a squat or crunches or the classic example. You'll see someone do 100 crunches just flopping around, but were they to do 10 very, very controlled, actually engaging their core crunches, they'd probably get more benefits from it. And so I think sometimes just slowing down is a lot harder sometimes than speeding up, which I think we find in a lot of mind-body practices as well.
Yeah, I'm 100% on board with that. I like to just say quality over quantity. And in this world of, limited time and trying to get as much done as you can in a short amount of time, it's like if you just take the time to learn the quality of this movement, you'll get so much more benefit, and you don't even have to bother rolling around on the floor, flailing around doing your 100 sit-ups. So I definitely am on board with that.
You mentioned Pilates, and a lot of my colleagues, yoga's really branched out these days, and a lot of yoga people are getting a lot more education in terms of exercise physiology and other movement modalities and CrossFit and Pilates and all kinds of things. And so many of my colleagues have gotten so into Pilates, specifically Pilates Reformer, and I know this is something that you have experience with. And for some reason, I've taken a handful of classes, and I just doesn't seem to work for me. And by work, I mean I don't feel anything. I'm not excited by it, and clearly it's an effective practice. The teachers and the dedicated students, I mean, they have some of the most functional core strength I've ever seen in any movement modality. And I'm just curious, totally just random off-topic question, but what do you think the challenge is with that? Do you think it's just a matter of finding a studio or an instructor who can guide me in the right direction? Is this a common experience, or what do you think?
Well, I do think that it's really important to start with a private session, and with an instructor that is really honing in on helping a student fire these deep core muscles. I really like for first-time students to start to get those aha moments, especially if they're already kind of already doing body movement and really aware of their muscles, and if they're already weightlifting or doing yoga. I like to show them the very beginning, like how it can be so challenging to engage the deep core, and then move into actually applying that into the full body movement. So if you're just hopping into a group reformer class, you're not going to get the foundations and probably not understand the full Pilates benefit. So, I mean, the first session that I teach people, we almost barely do any real body movement. It's a health history intake. I do a postural assessment, and then I teach them the foundation, kind of engaging pelvic floor transverses, and I show them how it applies, and all of a sudden they say, oh my gosh, my abdominals have never worked so hard in my life, and I've been doing all these sit-ups all day long. So then we take it on to the reformer and show them how that energy kind of moves out through the limbs, and I think that experience really helps them develop kind of that intrigue or enjoyment of the Pilates reformer. But it could just be, different people liking different modalities as well.
Well, as you're saying that makes a lot of sense, because when I teach yoga, the advanced students, let's say we're teaching a vinyasa class, 15 minutes into class, the advanced students are sweating and suffering, and the beginning students are just kind of flopping around. And a lot of that is just learning to actually engage in the practice. So sometimes the better you get, the simpler stuff becomes more challenging. So I think that's probably a big part of it. We've chatted a lot, Adrianne, about women, but obviously this stuff is really important for men too. I'm curious, do you teach men? Do you focus mostly on women, or what are your thoughts in terms of men listening?
Ironically, I try to gear mostly towards women, but I do actually, most of my private clients right now actually are men, because they get so much benefit of lumbar spine help. I get a lot of the clients that have spondylolisthesis and scoliosis and just back pain. And because this deep core activation all around pelvic floor transversus, breathing, using the diaphragm properly, and even the multifidus, I consider part of the deep core, really gives them relief all the way. So I ended up training a lot of men, and they tend to not have quite as much of the pelvic floor issue. I have had some male clients that do have issues with pelvic floor, but as far as Pilates goes, I do train a lot of men and have had lots of men clients throughout my entire time teaching.
I think the issues show up in a different way for men too, and they're maybe poorly identified. I think for a lot of men it shows up as different forms of sexual dysfunction, and nobody ever makes that connection for them. But anecdotally, a lot of men will report, improved sexual performance from yoga practices, specifically pelvic floor stuff, which again is not something is rarely gonna, a medical doctor or even a natural medicine doctor is rarely gonna make the connection between those two, but I think it's a common one that comes up for guys.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think the natural inclination is to start testing testosterone
hormone
and things
levels
like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's just across the board. I really have kind of moved into this space because I think people are just really neglecting pelvic floor. And like when I talk to the OBGYNs, I've talked to many of them because I want to be sure when I'm teaching, we're all on board together. And they say, I don't have the time to teach a woman how to do a Kegel, or I don't have time to teach this. They're just dealing with the patient once they have a serious problem. And then our physical therapist, same thing. So we really need to bridge the gap here. I mean, I think all women and men too need to learn how to engage pelvic floor, definitely by the time they're in their 20s, because we're starting to get into muscular atrophy just because of aging and starting to sit at our jobs, right? So, it's just, and, our doctors, I think this is a place really for the movement teachers, because we know how to cue, we know how to kind of get that mind-body connection going. Doctors sometimes are just there for diagnosing and curing, and they're not really working on a body all day long the way a teacher is. So I think that us learning how to teach this and hone into it and really have honest conversations with our clients and our students is just so important.
Adrianne, really great information. I appreciate you coming on the show. I know that you have quite a few really great videos and online resources. Where can we point people to follow your work and learn more?
Well, you can go to my website, which is thousandfoldlotus.com, and I have pelvic floor courses online where patients and clients can learn how to strengthen their pelvic floor in kind of a step-by-step module, and even do online sessions as well, where if people have reformers at their homes or they want to do pelvic floor specifically, I do online sessions there. So lots of free content on my website through my blog posts and videos on YouTube, and then also courses and one-on-ones as well. So
if you suffer from trigger point pain or highly localized or even radiating pain, there's a concept called autogenic inhibition that can be really helpful. The analogy I always share with people is, imagine you're out for a run, maybe you're running a 5K or something like that, and you push a little bit too hard and you reach down and you have a cramp in your calf muscle, and you grab onto your calf, you squeeze your fingers into it, and you sit down on the side of the road until that cramp passes. This instinct to grab your calf and hold on to it is utilizing this concept, this autogenic inhibition. And how it works is when you have a muscle that's overfiring, right? An overactive muscle is a cramping muscle. When there's too much electrical activity, when you push on it, when you squeeze it, it reduces the electrical activity. This is part of the reason deep tissue massage works so well. When you press really hard on those tissues and then release, think of autogenic inhibition as press and release, press and release. It lowers the electrical activity, the nervous system signals to that region. I'm telling you this because we have something that we use in my studios called Hurt So Good massage balls. And they're these big jumbo rubber balls, and they come in a set of 2, and you use them to roll specific areas of your body. The big area that people tend to work the most on is their shoulders and their upper back, but also in your deep six, your glutes, your hamstrings, and even your calves, and a lot of people work on their feet as well. You can utilize this concept of autogenic inhibition to push and release, but with a really, really great intensity, which again immediately reduces that electrical activity. Common scenarios where people get tremendous benefits from this is when people are working desk jobs, office jobs, new mothers who are spending 2, 3, 4 hours nursing, walking, carrying a child all day long. They tend to get excess tension in their upper back, their upper body. For somebody working on a computer keyboard, they might have excess tension in their shoulders, their wrists. And when you utilize this autogenic inhibition principle, in just a couple of minutes, you can press and release, and you can really relax your body. It makes it easier to sleep. It makes it easier to stretch if you're working on mobility. And in some cases, it can just make you feel more peace and relaxed in your body. It feels great. For many people, it's the deepest deep tissue massage they've ever had. When I tell people about this, they're like, why don't I just do this with my hands? Or why don't I just have my partner massage me, or my spouse, or whatever it is? Totally can try that. You will be shocked and amazed at how much more pressure, how much more quickly you can apply it when you utilize these Hurt So Good massage balls. It's just very, very targeted. You can get in there very, very quickly. For most people, for me, I've had tons and tons of body work. I lived in Thailand for years, so I got loads and loads of reflexology and deep tissue massage and oil massage and Ayurvedic massage, all this kinds of stuff. I've never had this kind of pressure, this kind of intensity that I can use when I'm in control and I'm using these Hurt So Good massage balls. It's not meant to be a replacement for good body work. Good body work's always great. But these Hurt So Good massage balls are really unique, particularly for upper back, shoulder, deep six, glute work. You can really get some great results. So if you'd like to learn more, go to shop.yogabody.com or just go to yogabody.com and you'll find Hurt So Good massage balls there. This week's nutritional tip is in response to a listener question about palm oil and questions about oils and healthy fats and what we should eat and shouldn't eat. It's a perennial topic because it's just a really complicated thing. I always say that as modern eaters, we're looking for lipids. We're hunting for lipids, hunting for good fats. It's one of the most challenging things to find anywhere in the world. But when your food supply is challenged, like when you're traveling or you don't have access to a kitchen, that's when it becomes most difficult. You'll see a lot of negative press around palm oil. And here's what happened. Palm oil has been around for a really long time. It represents something like 30% of plant-based oils internationally. Now, most of that is in a different part of the world. So in Southeast Asia, in Australia, in warmer climates where it grows. But there's also plenty of palm oil in US products, specifically packaged goods and manufactured products. And palm oil got a very bad name because it's about 50% saturated fat. So in the 80s and 90s, when saturated fat was vilified for giving people heart disease, it kind of went on the decline in the US. So people stopped using it. And then once people realized that, hey, saturated fat is not the bad guy. In fact, a lot of people could really benefit from getting saturated fat back into their diet. And in fact, for a lot of people, getting rid of those corn, soy, canola, sunflower, safflower, all those yellow oils in your kitchen and replacing them with saturated fats is often a really good move. So then palm oil came back into fashion with coconut oil. Coconut oil is definitely a more popular oil in North America right now, popular fat. But palm oil is back too, and there are organic palm oils, and there are really expensive, high-quality palm oils. So nutritionally, is palm oil a good oil? Totally. It can be a really, really healthy oil. Most of the bad press you see recently is because palm oil there's slash and burn techniques that are being used to cultivate land to grow palm oil. For palm oil cultivation, specifically in Indonesia. You might have seen on the news, I was actually in Southeast Asia at the time, and even in southern Thailand, we had smog I was in the Gulf of Thailand, and we had smoke actually coming from Indonesia, which is really far away from Koh Samui all the way to Indonesia. And Singapore had like total whiteout from smoke coming from Indonesia, and you can imagine how it was in Indonesia. Actually, you probably can't imagine. It was so bad. People were staying inside their house and dying of lung infections and things like this. Horrible. So they burn down the jungle and they grow palm oil. It kills orangutans, which is why people really freak out. It's really interesting ethical questions how we get so much more ethically invested in orangutans dying than we do in fish species, which are going extinct all over the world. But I guess it makes sense. They're very close. They're very human-like. An orangutan is sort of like a 4-year-old child. It's really very human-like, so it's very impactful. Perhaps more impactful than some kind of fish that's still, a flounder that's disappearing from the sea. But this is why people are really up in arms about it, because there are dead orangutans, thousands of them, every year. There's smoke all over the place, and it's a big mess. Nutritionally, palm oil is interesting. The cultivation techniques are a total disaster. It's really challenging as consumers because you want to play a role and you want to choose things that are great for your body and for the world, but you're always choosing between evils. There's so many challenging choices. Seems like palm oil right now is probably something that we should stay away from simply because of those environmental reasons. But it's really hard, because then what do you choose? You choose butter, and that comes from a cow, and that comes from where? And you choose coconut, and is that sustainable? It's really hard. It's forever hard, and right now we're choosing between bad options. Sustainability of our food supply, along with nutritional density, have just never really been priorities. It's always been flavor, shelf life, and cost. And so until that changes, I think we'll always just have to keep asking these questions. But it's a good question. Nutritionally, can palm oil be healthy? Totally. The processed stuff, definitely not. The stuff in packaged goods, the stuff in cookies, crackers, biscuits, all that stuff, definitely not a healthy oil. But a good organic, naturally sourced, well-stored palm oil can be a great source of lipids. But I think it's probably a good idea to avoid it, at least at present, unless you know it's coming from a sustainable farm. Little rant on environmentalism, but I hope that's helpful in terms of thinking about your food and thinking about your fats specifically. We have a question from Sarah this week. Sarah says, I've been listening to your podcast for a while now, mostly when cycling to work in the morning, working my way back from the most recent episodes. First, I want to thank you for all the fabulous food for thought you've given me so far. I've actually implemented a few changes and I'm enjoying getting impulses from you and your great guests. I've listened carefully to your most recent shows and mainly have one question. I have arthritis in my knee. I'm a 47-year-old normal weight woman, regularly working out, pretty advanced stage. The doctors and I were both slightly shocked because there's basically no cartilage left. The MRI revealed how bad it was because other than some pain after too much stress on my knee and permanent light swollen knee, I'm rather fine, trying to take good care of myself and my mobility. My goal is to keep it up, doing whatever I can, stay active for at least another 50 years. I'm wondering if you have any advice for me regarding movements, as well as nutrition. Your comments would be highly appreciated. From Cologne in Germany. Oh, great. I've been to Cologne just about a year ago. I was there. In terms of your knee, so here's the deal. Everybody over 40 has some kind of osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis is wear and tear arthritis. Most of you listening already have some in your knees and your back and other joints. It happens. Everything wears out, unfortunately. These damn bodies we have are falling apart. And so there's nothing you can really do about it except do your best, knowing full well that all of these parts are on loan and they are disintegrating. So the good news is, and what you've discovered here, is that you can have something that's relatively asymptomatic, even though, as you mentioned, you have almost no cartilage left at all. A lot of pain management is like this. The MRI will show nothing, you'll have crazy pain. The MRI will show you should have crazy pain, you have none. Pain is a very, very interesting beast. It's a phantom menace. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. In terms of figuring out what to do, movement is absolutely medicine when it comes to osteoarthritis, through the wear and tear arthritis, or rheumatoid arthritis, which is is an autoimmune condition where your body's attacking its own soft tissues. In either case, movement is medicine. It's extremely, extremely important, but you do want to do the stuff that's going to take the best care of your knees so it can last the longest. I also think in terms of biomedical advances, probably tissue regeneration is going to be one of the simplest. So something like the ability to transplant, regrow stem cell injections. This is where all the focus is going right now. A lot of it is to things like soft tissues, knees specifically. So I'm really hopeful that replacement parts will be available. So in terms of what you should do to prepare, probably save up your coins because it's going to be expensive, I think, and probably not covered by insurance. But I do think it's going to be available very, very quickly. I have a feeling it'll be one of the first bionic surgeries that's available or weird stem cell implants that will be available. And I know people will write in saying, oh, they're already doing this stuff. They're doing all kinds of stem cell injections. I know they are doing this. Pro athletes are getting this. It's not really accessible, not really proven yet, but I do feel like it will be very soon. So my first advice would be keep in mind that what you're playing here is the long game. And if you can last another 10 years with most of your structure in place, there's a good chance that replacement soft tissue grown internally is on its way. That's my theory. In terms of what to do, the lowest impact stuff is going to be the best, but keeping it moving. Unfortunately, we come back to swimming. And the reason I say unfortunately is because who has access to a pool on a daily basis? Not many people. It's kind of a hassle to get to a pool. I know there's probably one in your area, in your neighborhood, but it's still kind of a hassle. You sort of just want to go for a run or do some yoga or go ride your bike, but swimming is going to be your go-to. Cycling is not too bad on the knees, but it can certainly aggravate your knees, and some people do get knee problems from cycling. But my biggest advice is play the long game, be as gentle as you can. Chronic swelling, the challenge with that is you have low-grade inflammation in your body, and that can lead, it's a minor stress on your body, and when your body's dealing with that minor aggravation over and over and over, it takes away resources from other areas that might need it. So that's the thing to be considerate about. Thanks for your question, Sarah. Good luck with your knee. Keep moving, keep going, and we'll talk to you soon.
This week's iTunes review is by ESINTC from the US. Erica says, I'm just finishing up my 200-hour yoga teacher's training and am so hungry for information. I am also a psychotherapist and have so appreciated the information you present. Thanks for doing what you do and encouraging others to find their truth and health. Congratulations, Erica. You have won the Yoga Trapeze. Email us at podcast@yogabody.com and we'll ship it to you.
If you're a regular Yoga Talk Show listener, you'll definitely want to get on my email list. Go to yogabody.com/sign me up. When you enter your email address there, we always have free giveaways every month, yoga straps, water bottles, discounts in our shop, and all kinds of other things. When you sign up at yogabody.com/sign me up, I'll send you just one email a week with updates about the show, special offers, new courses, and valuable information that I think you'll find useful. So go to yogabody.com/sign me up to claim your free prize now.